Austin Dillon and his crew are appealing NASCAR's decision to withdraw his playoff berth, and Denny Hamlin has stepped in. On the Actions Detrimental podcast, Hamlin leaked what Dillon's team is likely to argue in the appeal, and he also found out what his chance of success would be. It's not looking good for Austin Dillon. If I'm thinking about what are they going to build a case on, I think it would be really hard to build a case to say it wasn't intentional, so probably that's not their angle, said Hamlin. More likely, it would be of the angle that it's unprecedented that a win has counted but not been eligible for the playoffs. You put in your rulebook that you have a win, and it puts you in the playoffs. I would argue that a little bit because I read some language to you last week that was in the rulebook, that when it comes to the kind of fairness of the sport they can make unprecedented calls. I think what NASCAR is going to defend. Maybe they're not just going to argue that he did it intentionally or not intentionally, whatever it might be. They're probably going to say people have wrecked for the win for quite some time and you've done nothing. This time, you chased to take us out of the playoffs, and that is unprecedented. Denny Hamlin doesn't know which angle Austin Dillon will take. What NASCAR probably would say was that we saw an unprecedented move and it caused us to make an unprecedented call. That's what I think that both sides are thinking about. I could be totally wrong, and they might have some sort of evidence or reasoning behind their appeal. We really don't know what they're appealing. They're going to appeal that this win should count. If you gave us the win should count towards the playoffs. I understand that argument, which is why I said you should have taken care of it at the track, enforced the rough driving penalty right then everything else just fixes itself. It doesn't have a split outcome. Dillon crashed Hamlin and Joey Logano to win the Cup Series race at Richmond last week. NASCAR did not decide on Dillon's playoff berth until later in the week. Along with the forfeited playoff spot, Dillon and Richard Childress Racing, RCR, were fined 25 points in the drivers' and owners' standings. But it did set a precedent though, and now, Denny Hamlin feels his colleagues understand the line when it comes to fighting for the win, following NASCAR's verdict on the Austin Dillon incident at Richmond Raceway. Hamlin discussed how Dillon's actions offered a greater knowledge of the line drivers should not cross while shoving their competitors out of the way for a potential win, as well as where NASCAR will go from here. Do I completely know? No, but generally speaking, yes. I believe that. I didn't hear a lot of drivers' comments through this weekend when they got interviewed, that they were just totally confused on what's good, what's not. There were a few, but generally speaking, what we know now is that if you choose to go and wipe out the leader on the final lap or on the green-white checkered, it looks really bad, Hamlin explained. Now, when I say wipe out the leader, there's many ways a car can be spun. If that driver has no opportunity to save it, that is wiping someone out. Spinning someone, my personal definition, is that you got into the back of them, they got up the track, they tried to save it, and then they spun. Like Joey's, when they spin around really quick, the driver had no chance, right? I even brought it up in my media session this weekend. There were many others where guys were battling, they made contact, one hit the wall a little bit. It's just different. When you're side by side and the contact is so minute, that's racing. It's the wiping out, and the car never even has the other person, never has a chance. That's where I think you could essentially say, and I've looked back, and there's of course this week has been filled with examples of, well, look at this, look at that. You know, I remember seeing one where, I think it was Stuart Friesen at Martinsville, he kind of right-hooked one of the drivers. It might have been Todd Gilliland at Martinsville, and I'm like, okay, boom, that should have been a penalty. It wasn't, but NASCAR needs to set a new precedent now. Clearly, Hamlin feels it will not prevent drivers from making contact at the end of a race, but he does believe something must be done to avoid what Dillon did at Richmond. Trust me, it is not going to keep us from making contact. We are still willing to take the risk of going in there and moving the guy up, if that's the absolute only way to make it work on the last lap. Now we want to work them over and just pass them for real, but I think they're going to have an opportunity in the next few weeks to see if they are going to be consistent. One method Hamlin feels NASCAR can fight aggressive driving is to have an official make the call from the tower during the race. Hamlin even sent VP of Competition Elton Sawyer to the task, along with a team of additional officials. I don't think that it needs to happen on Wednesday. I think that they need to let the men in the tower, whoever it might be, if it's Elton Sawyer, let it be Elton. He's a driver. He can see right when he sees it, and wrong when he sees that. Let them make the call for rough driving, tail end, and then we move on, Hamlin added. Whoever's on the good end or bad, they have to live with the result, because he's the official, and he made the call. And sometimes up there it's a few people. Some weeks there's other, NASCAR executives in the tower, and some weeks there's less people, but they just, even if it takes 10 minutes to just kind of look it all over, just make the right call. I think that there'll be an opportunity when we go to Martinsville and we get to these other lower series. It's been the last few years just an absolute train wreck of racing. I personally would like to see it cleaned up a little bit, and I think there's an opportunity for NASCAR here to sort of draw a new line. Are you on board with Hamlin's thought on the process? Should NASCAR do everything they can to make the process easier and, above all, faster? For example, the outcome of NASCAR's appeal decision on the Austin Dillon case will be known on Wednesday. That's almost 2 weeks after it happened. Surely this is taking too long, right? The National Motorsports Appeals Panel will determine whether to sustain, amend, or cancel Dillon's punishment of losing his automatic playoff berth and 25 points for intentionally wrecking Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin on the final lap to take the checkered flag. Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi of The Athletic discussed the forthcoming appeal. After obtaining some facts, Bianchi stated that he would be surprised if this is overturned. It's going to be fascinating, Bianchi added. Had this appeal been taking place a year and a half ago before NASCAR revamped the appeal process last spring after the Hendrick penalties and the Colleague penalties, I think RCR going into this would probably be feeling they have a good chance. Since then, though, it's kind of gone NASCAR's way, and I think that's reading the room and talking to some folks. The consensus is that I would be surprised if this is overturned. As Bianchi indicated, NASCAR changed the appeals process in April 2023 after 2 distinct challenges from Hendrick and Colleague produced different findings. The most significant modifications were the following. The appeals panel and final appeal officer may not completely remove any element of the originally assessed penalty provided in the penalty notice as defined in Rule Book Section 10.5.2, Determination of Penalties. Modifications to a penalty are limited to the minimum and maximum ranges as listed in the rulebook. NASCAR shall have the right to publish any decision of the appeals panel FAO, including without limitation, the names of the parties involved and the appeals panel FAO justification for modifying or rescinding a penalty. Dillon and RCR look to be facing an uphill battle, but Dillon stays optimistic. I feel pretty good about it, Austin Dillon said Saturday. I think Denny Hamlin has a podcast about the appeal process. He lays it out pretty well in how the appeal usually works. And I think that is why he was very forthcoming early in the week on his opinion of everything, because the appeals process isn't easy, but we will do a good job on our side to try and cover all of our bases and see what the outcome really is. Bianchi, however, believes Dillon and RCR have a 10% chance of winning their appeal. It depends who's on the panel, Bianchi said. That's the big thing, is who do you get on that panel? If you get a former driver, how do they interpret the code and that kind of thing? And the fine line of what this constitutes. I would say 10%, because I think there is a way you could argue if you're RCR hey, we've seen other moments last lap, other contact, that kind of thing where this has been acceptable. Why is this now not? I don't know if you can make that case, but I think that is the avenue to make that case. But again, I think 90% it's gonna go to NASCAR. I think it gets heavily tilted towards them. It seems to become a bummer for Austin Dillon, don't you think? Let me know your thoughts on the situation in the comments down below.